The Ballad of the Merry Lwyd by Vernon Watkins, who lived from 1906 to 1967. Prologue. Merry Lwyd, horse of frost, star horse and white horse of the sea, is carried to us. The dead return. Those exiles carry her, they who seem holy and have put on corruption, they who seem corrupt and have put on holiness. They strain against the door. They strain towards the fire which fosters and warms the living. The living, who have cast them out from their own fear of themselves, into the outer loneliness of death, rejected them and cast them out forever. The living cringe and warm themselves at the fire, shrinking from that loneliness, that singleness of heart. The living are defended by the rich warmth of the flames which keeps that loneliness out. Terrified, they hear the dead tapping at the panes. Then they rise up, armed with the warmth of firelight and the condition of scorn. It is New Year's night. Midnight is burning like a taper. In an hour, in less than an hour, it will be blown out. It is the moment of conscience, the living moment, the dead moment. Listen. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Now dead men rise in the frost of the stars, and fists on the coffins knock. They dropped in their graves without one sound. Then they were steady and stiff. But now they tear through the frost of the ground as heretic, drunkard, and thief. Why should you fear, though they might pass, ripping the stitch of grief? The white sheet under the frosted glass, crisp and still as a leaf. Or look through the sockets that once were eyes at the table in white cloth spread. The terrible picklock charities raise the erected dead. Under your walls they gnaw like mice, virtue is unmasked. The hands of the clock betray your vice, they give what none has asked. For they have burrowed beneath the graves, and found what the good gave most. Refuse cast by the righteous waves in fossil wraith and ghost. Chalice and wafer, wine and bread, and the picklock, picklock, picklock tread. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Good men gone are evil become, and the men that you nailed down, clamped in darkness, clamor for rum and ravish on beds of down. The vision your light denied them laid above the neglected door, and the chattering speech of skull and spade beckons the banished poor. Locked out lepers with halos come, put out the clock is dumb. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. The breath of a numb thing, loud and faint, something found and lost. The minute drops in the minute glass. Conscience counts the most. What mounted murderous thing goes past the room of Pentecost? Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. What shudders free from the shroud so white stretched by the hands of the clock? What is the sweat that springs in the hair? Why do the knee joints knock? Bones of the night in the naked air, knock, can you hear that knock? Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. A knock of the sands on the glass of the grave, a knock on the sands of the shore, a knock of the horse's head of the wave, a beggar's knock on the door, a knock of a moth on a pane of light, in the beat of the blood a knock. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Sands in the glass, the shrinking sands in the picklock, picklock, picklock hands. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Fasten the yard gate, bolt the door, and let the great fat drip. The roar that we love is the frying pan's roar on the flames like a floating ship. The old Nick will keep the flies from our sheep, the tick, the flea, and the louse. Open the flagons and cork the deep beer of this bolted house. Unseen fingers are arching now. Hark at the pendulum's chain. Out of the night they have pulled the plow, pulled the dead man's wain. Bones of the dead are clattering, clinking, pulling the plow from the shore. Dead men's fingers are feeling, knocking, knocking now on the door. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Crammed with food, the table creaks, the dogs grow fat on the crumbs. God bless our board that springs no leaks, and here no ruffian comes. No beggars itching with jackdaw's eyes, no fox on the trail of food. No man with the plague from the hangman's rise, no jay from the dead man's wood. Chalice and wafer that bless the dead, and the picklock, picklock, picklock tread. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Bones of the dead should come on their knees under a pilgrim's cloak. But out in the dark, what devils are these that have smelt our kitchen smoke? Listen, listen, who comes near? What man with a price on his head? What load of dice, what leak in the beer has pulled your steps from the dead? Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Starving we come from Bridwolf Bryn, and a great meal we have lost. We might have stayed by the fire of the inn, sheltered from the frost, and there a sweet girl stood and spread the table with good things. Fell and fell beer with the mountain's head, and a pheasant with hungry wings. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. There were jumping sausages, roasting pies, and long loaves in the bin, and a stump of carefully to rest our eyes, and a barrel rolling in. But dry as the grave from Griffith Bryn, we are come without one rest. And now you must let our Mary in, she must inspire your feast. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. For she knows all from the birth of the flood to this moment where we stand, in a terrible frost that binds the blood, and a cramp that claws the hand. Give us rhyme for rhyme to the wood of the door, then open the door if you fail. Our wit is come from the sea waves' roar, the stars and the stinging hail. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Go back. We have heard of dead men's bones that hunger out in the air. Jealous they break through the burial stones, their white hands joined in a prayer. They rip the seams of their proper white clothes, and with red throats parched for gin, and buckled knuckles and bottle-necked oaths they hammer for the door of an inn. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. O piteous brothers, through snow and rain we are come from Harlech's waves. Tall spears were laid on the mountain, we hid in the warriors' caves. We were afraid when the sun went down, when the stars flashed we were afraid. But the small lights showed us Macnuleth town, and bent on our knees we prayed. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Though you come from the grim waves' monk-like hood and Harlech's bitter coast, white horses need white horses' food. We cannot feed a ghost. Cast your lewd to the white spray's crest that pounds and rides the air. Why should we break our lucky feast for the braying of a mare? Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. In the black of Engedi's cave we hid in the fall of the bride. And the stars flew back from the lifted lid, we saw those horsemen ride. We hid all night in the cowl of the wave, chariots and kings we saw. In Goliath's darkness, bright and brave, felled by an ass's jaw. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Oh, white is the starlight, white on the gate, and white on the bar of the door. Our breath is white in the frost, our fate falls in the dull waves' roar. Oh, rhyme with us now through the keyhole's slit, and open the door if you fail. The sea frost, brothers, has spurred our wit, aye, and the killing hail. Midnight, 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 midnight. hark at the hands of the clock. What thirst consumed by the leaping flames, what thirst has brought you back? From the starry writing of holy names, the spittle of hell turns black. Austere star energies, naked white, roused you, but still you play, with a bottle drowned in a drunkard's night, brought by the wicked spray. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. The slinking dead, the shrinking sands, and the picklock hands. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Hark, they are going, the footsteps shrink, and the sea renews her cry. The big stars stare, and the small stars wink, the plow goes glittering by. It was a trick of the turning tide that brought those voices near. Dead men pummeled the panes outside, we caught the breath of the year. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Out in the night nightmares ride, and the nightmares' hooves draw near. Dead men pummel the panels outside, and the living quake with fear. Quietness stretches the pendulum's chain to the limit where terrors start, where the dead and the living find again they beat with the selfsame heart. In the coffin glass and the window pane you beat with the selfsame heart. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. We bring from white Hebron and Ezekiel's valley, from the Dead Sea of Harlech and the mountain-girt Dalgelly, all that singing wave from Cater to Kidwelly, a stiff, a starstruck thing, blown by the stinging spray, and the singing light of the stars, our white, stiff thing. Death and breath of the frost that has known the room of glass, dropped by the Milky Way to the needle and thread of the pass. Hark, they are coming back, those fellows, giving the stars another name, blowing them up with a pair of bellows from a jumping, thumping, murderous flame. Men of the night with a legion of wrongs, fists in the dark that shudder with shame, hated lechers with holy songs, bastard bodies that bear no name. We bring from Cader Idris and those ancient valleys, Mary of your sorrows, queen of the starry fillies. You'll not play skittles with us, white spirit, spray of malice, froth from an old barrel, tell us if that be holy. Hers is the white art that rouses light in the darkest palace. Though black as a mole's burrow, truly we come to bless. You come from drunkards' houses and bent picklock alleys. You come to thieve or borrow, your starved loins poke and press. Great light you shall gather, for Mary here is holy. She saw dark thorns harrow your God crowned with the holly. Have you watched snowflakes wither? They fasten, then fade slowly. Hither and thither blowing, your words are falling still. Deeper sadness knowing than death's great melancholy, we journeyed from Calgaru, from that skull-shaped hill. A white horse, frozen blind, hurled from a sea wave's hollow, fostered by spray and wind, profane and priest-like thing. She has those precious secrets, known to the minstrel solely, experienced in the marrow, quick to tame beasts unruly. She should have been a whistle, for that tames our collie. He darts on like an arrow, then he creeps up slowly. Oh, if she were a whistle, she would not call your collie, but through this keyhole narrow try your wits to rally. Go back to Cader Idris, to your dry bones valley. Death shall pounce tomorrow and break upon your folly. Clustered thick are the stars, and the fire irons lying still, dust in the iron bars. Frost on the windowsill, the fire warms many hands, but there where the shadows press, a single point of light can bring great loneliness. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. In the black of the churchyard yew we lay, and the long roots taught us much. We groped for the sober light of day, light that we dared not touch. The sleet of the stars fell cold and thin, till we turned and it touched our crown. Then we yearned for the heat in the marrow of sin, for the fire of a drinker's town. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Burp brightest brimstone light on him, and burn his rafters black, that will not give when his fears are dim, the treasure found in the sack. In the mouth of the sack, and the stifled breath, and the sweat of the hands in the noose, In the black of the sack and the night of death shines what you dare not lose. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Under the womb of teeming night our Mary tries your faith. She has charity's crown of light, spectre she knows and wraith. How sweet-tongued children are quickly born by a swiveling devil's thrust, mounting the night with a murderous horn, riding the starry gust. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Under the edge of the spray of the stars, in the hollow dark of a wave, we heard the fire iron stirring the bars, laying the ash of the grave. We saw your faith in the pin of the tongs, laying your fears at rest. You buried our bones with your drinking songs, and murdered what you loved best. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. But the pin goes into the inmost dark, where the dead and living meet, and the clock is stopped by the shock of the spark, or the stealthy patter of sleet. Where disdain has cast to its utmost pitch the strands of the finished thread, the clock goes out and the ashes twitch, roused by the breaking of bread. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Go back with your drowned and drunken eyes, and your crooked mouth so small, and your merry fold of the starry skies, go back to the sea waves' fall. If we lift and slide the bolt in the door, what can warm beer buy? And what can you give for the food we store but a slice of starving sky? Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Oh, who has woven the skein of the hair, and who has knotted the ropes of the fist? And who has hollowed the bones of the eyes? One of you answer, the hands have kissed. I see in your eyes white terror, I see in your locked hands hate. Press, we are one step nearer, the live coals in the grate. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. The slinking dead, the shrinking sands, and the picklock, picklock, picklock hands. Hark, they are going, the footsteps shrink, and the sea renews her cry. The big stars stare and the small stars wink, the plow goes glittering by. It was a trick of the turning tide that brought those voices near. Dead men pummeled the panes outside, we caught the breath of the year. Dread and quiet, evil and good, frost in the night has mixed their blood. Thieving and giving, good and evil, the beggar's a saint and the saint a devil. Mary Lwyd, Lwyd Mary, a sacred thing through the night they carry. Betrayed are the living, betrayed are the dead, all are confused by a horse's head. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Lazarus comes in a shroud so white, out of the hands of the clock. While baskets are gathered, loaves of light, rape is picking the lock. Hungering fingers, bones of the night, knock, knock, knock. Bones of the dead with their crooked eyes and their crooked mouths so small, night nags fold of the starry skies, threatening our feast they call. We face the terrible masquerade of robbers dressed like the dead. The cold star energies make us afraid, afraid of the picklock tread. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. A starlit crucifix hits their knees, and a chain of blood-stained beads drops to the fork where the fingers seize their good and evil deeds. Those blasphemous hands can change our mind or mood with a craftsman's skill. Under their blessing they blast and blind, maim, ravish, and kill. The slinking dead, the shrinking sands, and the picklock, picklock, picklock hands. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Resurrection's wings and corruption's moth beat on the window pane. The tombs are ripped like a tablecloth, and madmen teach the sane. A voice redresses those ancient wrongs with a wrong more deep than all. Holy Charity's bastard songs burst from a sea wave's fall. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Hell curse this house for a badger's holt if we find no man devout. God singe this doorway hinge and bolt if you keep our evil out. Long-limbed we hung in the taunting trees and carried our greatest thirst. Give us a drink, light breaks our knees, give, or the house is cursed. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Snatch off that mask from a drinker's mouth, all lit by phosphorus up. Men of the night, I know your drouth, your mouths would blister the cup. When the big stars stare and the small stars wink, you cry, it's the break of day. Out of our sight you are blind with drink, ride your merry away. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Pity our penitent fingers now, telling the beads of a chain. Out of the night we have pulled the plow, pulled the dead man's wain. Out of the torment of huge night where the cruel stars are hung, we have come with blessing to heal your sight, if first you will cool our tongue. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Go back with your drowned and drunken eyes and your crooked mouths so small, and your merry fold of the starry skies, go back to the sea waves fall. If we lift and slide the bolt in the door, what can our warm beer buy? What can you give for the food we store but a slice of starving sky? Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Surely, surely you'll open the door, now that you know our sins, for all grows good that was foul before, where the spark of heaven begins. Where the spark that cleaves to the chimney's groove is blown to the freezing weather, it is men's good that breaks their love, their evil draws them together. Chalice and wafer, wine and bread, in the picklock, picklock, picklock tread. Know you are one with Cain the farm, and die of dowless pit. You have thieved with Benjamin's robber arm, with Delilah you lay by night. You cheated death with the Barabbas the cross. When dice of hell came down, you prayed with Joe in the prisoner's fosse, and ran about Rahab's town. Midnight, 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 hark the hands of the clock. Oh, had we never drunk a drop, you might receive us then, men of the snow-deep mountain top and soot-faced mining men. Do you not hear like an anvil ring the smith of the rock of coal, who fell on his steel like that great king and sundered body and soul? Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Oh, crouch and cringe by the bounding flame and close your eyelids fast. Out of the breath of the year we came, the breath of the year has passed. The wits of a skull are far too great, being out of the hands of a clock. When merry Lwyd knocks on the door in charity, answer that knock. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Go back. We have heard of dead men's bones that hunger out in the air. Jealous they break through their burial stones, their white hands joined in a prayer. They rip the seams of their proper white clothes, and with red threats parched for gin, with buckled knuckles and bottle-necked oaths, they hammer the door of an inn. Oh, a ham bone high on a ceiling hook, and a goose with a golden skin, and the roaring flames of the food you cook, for God's sake let us in, to see the white beer rise in the glass, and the brown jump out of the mug, would lift those stiffened loons in the grass like lambs to the darling dug. Sinner and saint, a horse's head in the frost. Go back to your hell, there are clean souls here. Go back to your barns of muck. Go back to your hell and leave our beer, and your merry bring you luck. We'll fill you with stones, we'll strip you clean, and the stars if you're not gone. But Jesus, why are you all unseen, on whom our lamplight shone? The slinking dead, the shrinking sands, and the picklock, picklock, picklock hands. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. Eyes on the cloth, eyes on the plate, rigor mortis straightens the figure, striking the clock when the hands are straight. You have seen a god in the eyes of a beggar. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Oh, white as a frost on the breath-bleared panes, and the star-like fire within. And our Mary is white in her starry reins, starved through flesh and skin. It is a skull we carry in the ribbons of a bride, bones of the night frost prairie, bones of the fire inside. None can look out and bear that sight, none can bear that shock. The Mary's shadow is too bright, her brilliance is too black. None can bear that terror when that pendulum swings back, of the stiff and stuffed and stifled thing gleaming in the sack. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. And that was from Ballad of the Merry Lwyd and Other Poems. Now, not everyone has heard of her. Sometimes you'll see pictures circulating of a horse's skull on a stick, shrouded in a white sheet, bedecked with ribbons and sometimes ornaments, and that is the Merry Lwyd. Some say that she is part of the Wild Hunt. Others have other origin conjectures for her. What do you think? Until next time, I'm Teresa Garcia, or Amehana Arashi.